Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. I am the Gab Orman. I'm the Director of Compliance Technologies here with Toolkit, and we have Brandon Curtis here today to give us a presentation on harmonizing reporting across all of our environmental programs. So thank you for attending. You will not be able to unmute during the meeting, but we do have the Q&A active. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in there and I will be monitoring that for us today. Thank you. And Brandon, you can take it away.
All right, great. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Glad to have you here. Thank you for joining us. My name is Brandon Curtis. I'm a co-founder here at Toolkit. I'm also an environmental attorney, partner here at Heiserberg Graf Curtis. And I also have the opportunity to teach at the ASU Law School and at the Master's of Law program there as well. So I'm excited to talk about harmonizing reporting with you all today and talk a little bit about Toolkit and how we work towards solving some of the problems that we're going to identify. So just a brief overview of what we're going to be covering. We'll give you a brief introduction to Toolkit for those of you who haven't interacted with our products or services before. We'll then jump into best practices for managing data and driving harmony between our reports and minimizing our risk. And finally, we'll talk a little bit about resolving inconsistencies in data when they do arise. All right, so this slide just gives you a brief introduction to the various tools that we are offering as part of the Toolkit suite. I won't spend a lot of time on this slide, but just wanted to give everyone sort of an overview scope of the types of things that we cover. Our compliance tool is sort of the central hub that manages all tasks and actions that need to be completed across the organization. Our determination tool helps us understand what regulatory requirements apply to our sites. This includes anything from NSPSs or niche apps to water programs for NPDES, stormwater management, SPCC, and covers waste as well as other chemical-driven programs such as TRI. Our third tool here we have listed, which we'll talk about just a little bit today, is the emissions tool. This is just what it sounds like. Many of us are subject to Clean Air Act permitting under Title V or other NSR programs. And this tool is designed to manage emissions reporting that needs to be conducted as part of those programs. Switching over to the right side, our parsing tool allows you to take any permits or plans, use our AI system, Ivy, pull out those actionable items and track them in the compliance tool so that those become living documents that we can track and verify over time. TRI Toolkit, we're coming up on the end here. We've been having a lot of fun with that this year. But this is our end-to-end TRI reporting software, and it can take anything from a stack of SDSs to inventory items and help you and walk you through every step of the way to generating a TRI report. And then finally, of course, we offer consulting just as support as part of our software services, and as well, we offer that independent of that. So if you have any consulting needs in any of the air, water, waste programs, we can assist there as well. And then coming up in this following year, we are also beginning to launch a Tier 2 software reporting program, which will be integrated with this suite as well. Okay, so let's jump into the substance of what we're going to be covering today. We'll begin with some discussion of data management and different principles that we rely on here at Toolkit to make sure that our data has integrity, can be reproduced over time. So as environmental professionals, I know that the problem of managing data is all too familiar and painful. You might even wince a little bit when I mention the concept. But we have all of this data that we need to manage, collect, verify over time to populate all sorts of reports, whether those are biennial waste reports at the end of the year, emissions reports, TRI, Tier 2, other reports associated with our environmental permits, such as our wastewater discharge permits, all those things. And it's extraordinarily rare that you're going to find a piece of data that is only used in one of those reports. More often than not, this data is shared across the organization and populates all manner of environmental information. And so often we encounter people who are struggling with managing this same number that appears in 10 different places and having to manage all of these different sources of truth. And so the first concept we're going to be talking about today is just that. How do we manage and maintain a single source of truth? So this concept is really just what it sounds like. Every data element that we need to use in our reporting, ultimately, if we can, we should make that come from one authoritative place rather than having to edit and recreate it in multiple systems. This allows us to eliminate inconsistencies. It allows us to become more efficient. It allows us to simplify version control. And ultimately, it makes it to where we only have to get it right once rather than multiple times. And I don't know about you guys, but I like being, having to only get it right once. Having to get it right more than once, that's a tough thing. Um, so there are really three principles that three items that we try to identify whenever we're dealing with a data element, to make sure that we can reliably defend that as a source of truth. The first is we want to know who owns that data element. Who's the person or the department that's responsible for maintaining and confirming that number? Second, we want to know the source of that information. So, did that come from an internal procurement system? Did that come from a safety data sheet? Did that come from a performance test? We want to know the source of the information. And finally, to the extent that that data needs to be interpreted, we need to know what is the method for interpreting that source of information. A great example of that is oftentimes we'll pull product usage data from a procurement system, but that procurement system will require a very specific query in order to pull the information we need. And so one way to document that method would be to document the query and the system from which that query is pulled so that we can make sure that we can reproduce that number in the future. So I put together just a simple list of questions to help look ourselves in the mirror a little bit and see if we're struggling from any of these types of issues. So just as I read these off, just kind of ask yourself this question and kind of grade yourself against these concepts. So first, are you entering the same number in multiple places? For example, when you're doing your TRI report and reporting your air releases, are you maintaining two separate workbooks to manage each of those? Are different teams maintaining separate versions of the same data? Are you manually checking that one workbook matches another workbook? Are you relying on emails, screenshots, or Bob said notes to support final values? And finally, are you changing the same value in multiple reports when one correction is made? Uh, any of us, I imagine, can say yes to at least one of these questions, and these are all symptoms of the same challenge that we have to face, which is we have all this data that we got to wrangle, and we got to somehow make it make sense, make it defendable, make it reproducible. And I think it's important just to take a step back and think about why these concepts matter, what are sort of the risks that we face. I deal with these types of things as an environmental attorney in enforcement contexts all the time. So of course, when we have too many sources of truth or we've not adequately documented our source of truth, this can lead to an increase in errors and inconsistencies. Every time that number is re-entered, copy, pasted, or recalculated, we create another opportunity for that record to drift. Second, obviously, tribal knowledge can create real fragility. So if our process depends on, ask Bob, then we're not preserving the method adequately. We've really just preserved someone's memory, and that's not very durable, as we know, because Bob wins the lottery sometimes. Obviously, typos can be expensive. A lot of the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, RCRA programs, some of those can carry fines of up to $100,000 per day per penalty. And so, these things have real consequences. It's important to get them right, and so they're not to be taken lightly. Obviously, when we duplicate our work and have to manage truth in many different places, that's going to waste time. It's going to waste money. It's going to make us pull our hair out. So that's an important risk and hazard to take into account as well. Of course, whenever we have inconsistencies in our reporting, in particular if that's public-facing reporting, that can hurt our reputation or our credibility as an organization. And so that's something to take seriously as well. And finally, many of these reports require our responsible officials, our general managers, our presidents, our vice presidents to certify to the truthfulness of those reports. And so I get asked to review reports all the time as an attorney, and that's something that I always have at top of mind. Is the responsible official that's signing this report incurring any unnecessary risk because we've not, done a careful enough job in managing our data? So real briefly, I just wanted to talk through some ways that Toolkit has designed our systems to eliminate a lot of these risks. One great example of that is the integration between our emissions tool and our TRI reporting. As you know, under the Emissions Clean Air Act program, a lot of the hazardous air pollutants that have to be reported over time are also TRI Section 313 chemicals that have to be reported as part of our TRI reporting systems. And so our systems are designed so that whatever we calculate within our emission systems uses the same single source of data, uses the same release profiles and algorithms and constants to make sure that what we're getting in one system matches what we're getting in the other system, which drives consistency between our public-facing reports. Another way that we eliminate this risk is our TRI reporting tool is designed to import directly into TRIME. And so if any of you are struggling right now with taking what's in your spreadsheet and keying it into CDX or TryMe, our system is designed to rescue you from that toil. Once you've entered that data into our system, it's a matter of 2 or 3 clicks before you can populate everything into TryMe. There's no manual data entry in TryMe whatsoever. And so that eliminates the risk for having to get it right more than once. Once you've defined your source of truth within our system, that's automatically exported into EPA's system. We take a similar approach with our emissions tool and CARES, which is EPA's emissions reporting system. All the data that's developed within the emissions tool can be imported directly into CARES using their XML or spreadsheet import functionality. And so you can guarantee that there's not going to be any duplication of efforts. There's not going to be any inconsistencies from manually keying that data in. Okay, so with that, we're going to transition to this concept of mapping our data. And this will take us through some of those initial concepts in a little more detail that we've covered. So we've been talking a lot about this concept of a single source of truth. And obviously, we would all love to live in a world where all of the data we need exists in one place. But as we know, that does not exist in the real world, and certainly not off the shelf without a great deal of effort. And what we are really facing is we have environmental data spread across many, many different sources. And so ultimately, what we need to do is we need to take those disparate, varied sources, and we need to build a map that tells us where they all exist and maps out what the source, owner, and method is for each of those. So on this next slide, we have just a really basic, crude example of what a data map might look like. So in the first column, we're identifying what our data element is, whether that's production or fuel use or waste transfers. In the second column, we're identifying our owner. In the third column, we're identifying the source of that data. Where is it coming from? And this is very high level, but you want to provide enough detail that someone coming in after you can understand exactly what that means and where that source can be found. And finally, the method. This provides any explanatory information that's necessary to take the information from the source and get it into the format that's needed for the report. So let's talk about each of these elements at a little higher level or greater detail. So let's start with the first part of the map, which is ownership. I can't tell you how often I see when I'm looking at, emissions reports or spreadsheets, there's this little note in there that says, per email from Bob Smith on 2/11. And I often think to myself, what does that mean and what good does that do me? All that does is it tells me who I need to ask if I have follow-up questions. But what if Bob's no longer there? What if the email has been fallen victim to our data retention policies and is no longer available? Those types of notes has always struck me as they're more designed to know who we can blame if things don't go right than they are about being able to reproduce that information in the future. And so when we're talking about data owners, I think it's important to ask ourselves a few questions. Is this going to allow us to preserve institutional knowledge? Who's maintaining this data? How's the number generated? What assumptions or limitations are going to apply? And so this really sets us up for the future, for next year, and it helps us understand sort of the chain of information within our programs. Within the Toolkit system, ownership is never in doubt. That's one of the great things about, modern software is we can log all sorts of data, and that we can use that data to help us in the future. So I've got just a couple screenshots here illustrating how some of these concepts work. Here on the left, we've got a number of notes that are being taken or logged every time. We log usage information that feeds TRI or emissions or other reporting. Here on the right is an example of our note system where you can identify and log any information that's necessary that you want to keep for future purposes. And you can scope those notes to appear for forever or for a specific reporting year. And then here on the bottom right is just an example of our data source concept, where you can trace back who uploaded different files and where those files ultimately came from. All right, moving on from ownership, of course, we want to identify the source. So oftentimes the same piece of information is going to be available in multiple sources. And so we have to sort of work through how to identify the best source or the best available data. As an attorney, I'm always thinking about this from a legal perspective. And so when I'm looking for a source, I'm looking for what's legally relevant. It needs to match what the rule, the permit, or the reporting or framework ultimately requires. So take, for example, a production number. I was, working with a facility this year, and we came up with three different numbers for what their total production was that came from three different systems. And so we had to work through, okay, which of these sources is the most on point? What's the most relevant? What best matches what this legal requirement is actually asking us to do? Um, Ideally, we want our source to be a direct source of that information. It should measure the activity itself. So a good example is a gas meter, right? If we have a gas meter on the source, we want to make sure we're pulling that information directly from the gas meter. Oftentimes, we'll have different assumptions that are built in to estimate things. And I've often found that those estimates are a shortcut for a direct measurement that we do in fact have. For example, we might have to estimate the amount of dust that we generate. And so at some point long ago in the past, we've developed a pound per ton production of dust. And so we're calculating that dust. But in reality, we ship that dust off every couple months. And so we have shipment records that can give us a pretty good idea of what that dust looks like, and we can reconcile that with any overlap from year to year. And so, every data source oftentimes will have pros and cons, but we try to prioritize those data sources that provide the most direct route to the information we're looking for. Another thing we look for in a data source is control. We want to make sure that the data source is coming from a system that is auditable, verifiable, that has versioning, and that we can review over time. And of course, we want that source to be traceable. And so we want to make sure that the original document, whether that be, an export from our internal systems, an invoice or a manifest, or whatever that case may be, that we can trace back at source and we can maintain the original information in a way that can be verified after time. We've talked through a lot of these, but this is just some examples of what the source might look like for different types of data elements. Obviously, when we're dealing with product usage, that might come from a procurement system, it might come from a production or inventory system. And we really have to evaluate the pros and cons, the strengths and weaknesses of each of those data sources to arrive at what is the best piece of information. Chemical data, obviously, we're dealing with things like safety data sheets, testing, or other types of more specific data sheets meant for our specific purposes. You got to love when you have safety data sheets and environmental data sheets and they say different things. So it's important to know what data is available out there and make sure you're picking the best one. Mission factors is another one where source documentation is really important. These often can come from source testing, real-time monitoring from SEMS or other types of periodic sampling. And then ultimately, these often will come from published sources such as AP42 or other industry publications. So you want to make sure that the source of these is well documented, well understood, and reviewed periodically. So within Toolkit, we have multiple strategies for being able to pull in all types of different sources. And I'll walk through a few screenshots of various source strategies that we've implemented. And one of the biggest challenges that we've faced as we've developed and implemented these systems and helped people on board is that this data can come in all different types and all different shapes and sizes. And so much of the work really comes down to how do I take these disparate formats and disparate sources and make them into one cohesive whole, one cohesive data set. And so we've done a lot to try and meet people where they're at. We understand not everyone's going to have a mature procurement system or a mature SDS library. And so we've really tried to make a number of different tools available to make this all possible and as painless as it can be. So here on here, we just have an example of really what the simplest approach would be. We mentioned the note system. We have note systems throughout all of our apps that allow you to identify any information that you want to make sure you don't forget. This is obviously not the best way to do it, but again, we're trying to meet people where they're at. And so if this is the best we can do, we do provide a way to rigorously document all of the origins and information for the data that needs to be remembered. Another way that we help sort of connect your world with our world is we have a very robust mapping system. And so this screenshot here shows along this first column entries from an SAP system. And it tells you where we can map those entries to different products within our system. And so this is a really efficient way to take unique IDs that exist within your databases and link those to the relevant inputs within our system. And that automates all of that logging year over year. And so once you've made that data map linkage once, that will live for you forever within the system. And logging usage for 200 products becomes as simple as uploading the inventory system that has been mapped in previous years. Another approach we take is we have an AI agent that we call Ivy, and she does a great job of taking information that's disorganized and disparate from different sections or different data types and bringing it into the environment of our systems. And so, we can take data in a spreadsheet for products that have been indexed over time and we can throw that at Ivy, and she does an excellent job of pulling that information into our systems, documenting the source, keeping the original documentation on file, so that we always know where that data is coming from. Another common source that we have to deal with is testing. And so we also have functionality to take any type of testing report that contains any type of product or chemical information and using Ivy to extract that information and keep that data on file. So this particular screenshot here on the right, you see an analytical that was commissioned, and here on the left, you see the information that Ivy has pulled out and can be used in emissions calculations or release calculations, however it's needed. We also dynamically pull data from public sources. So we integrate directly with eManifest, and so to the extent you have any hazardous waste shipments that need to be reported in TRIME, I'm sorry, in your TRI report, we can pull that information in and use it to verify any local manifest records that you may have. Rainfall data is often used in various calculations as well and can be a real challenge to track down. And so we're able to pull rainfall and other climate data in directly from official government sources and document where that data is coming from and save you time Googling and aggregating different data sources. Another example of how we do this is we pull in all of your data from past TRI reports that's available on EPA's data systems. And so that makes configuration of different types of data elements that don't change over time really, really simple and straightforward. Finally, we've talked about ownership, we've talked about sources. We'll now touch briefly on methods. So there's often this interpretive layer that needs to take place between getting the raw data source and getting the information from it that we ultimately need to have a successful report. And so when we're documenting our method, we want to document where the data came from, how often the data requires updating, what steps were taken to produce it, what units and conversions were used, if any, and any assumptions or exclusions that may need to be made. A great example of this is it's not enough to say, production from QMS. A stronger method would say the data was pulled from QMS for the calendar year. It was filtered to the final accepted product. It excluded rejected material and duplicate tickets, and then it converted from pounds to tons for the emissions calculation. So that level of detail turns the number into something the team can repeat, review, and ultimately defend year after year. Okay, we're about done here. I just had a final brief section on managing inconsistencies. And we've touched on this a little bit, but you may encounter, if you haven't already, as you look for different versions of the truth or look for the single version of the truth, you may find that our systems, our tracking tells different stories. And so this is an example that I've come across many times where we're looking for ultimate production. And, we might have a different number for accounting, operations, and shipping that don't quite agree with each other. And so when I'm trying to evaluate, which piece of data is the most reliable, the first place I start is matching the legal requirement. And really what this comes down to is what can I defend? If I'm audited, what piece of data has the most authoritative appeal to it? What will allow me to answer questions from a regulator? Obviously, we want to check scope and timing. When we're talking about tons produced, sometimes shipping may not be reliable because there will be carryover from prior years. And sometimes accounting may not be reliable. Maybe that's looking at a different time frame, a fiscal year, that type of thing. So you want to make sure it matches the scope that you're looking for. Data quality, of course. If some of this data is coming from someone manually logging information in the field, it may not be as precise as something that's being measured with a calibrated scale. And of course, we always want to document the rationale. And so if we have competing sources of data, we want to identify why they're different and why we ultimately chose the data that we chose. Okay, and that concludes our webinar for today. We're at time at the moment, but I'm happy to stick around if there are any questions. So I will hang out, and if there are any questions, I'll take those. If not, we really appreciate everyone taking the time today to join us and learn a little bit more about Toolkit and harmonizing reporting. You can learn more at our website there at envirotoolkit.com. And with that, I'll stick around. And again, thank you everyone for your time.
Thank you, Brandon. Since nothing's come through on the Q&A or the chat, I think we will end our webinar. You can feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. Thank you.